The road stretched into the night, the cracked pavement illuminated only by the yellowed glow of the van's headlights. The silence outside was thick, pressing against the windows like a held breath. A gust of wind stirred the trees that lined the highway, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky. The air smelled of damp earth, of rust and something stale, untouched for years. As the vehicle rolled to a stop, the engine hummed one last time before Fred switched it off. The headlights cast long shadows over the rusted entrance ahead. The iron gates, once proud and polished, stood as corroded sentinels, draped in vines that slithered between the bars like nature itself was trying to keep something locked away. Above them, a faded sign still clung to the remains of its frame. Wonder Funlet. The letters, cracked and peeling, had lost their luster. The vibrant colors that once drew and excited families had dulled into shades of neglect. The amusement park beyond the gates lay in complete darkness, swallowed by time and mystery. No voices, no laughter, only the faint whisper of the wind carrying stories no one dared to repeat too loudly. Fred stepped out first, his boots crunching against loose gravel as he approached the gate. His flashlight flicked on, casting a beam of light through the bars. The pathway beyond was cracked and uneven, weeds sprouting through the fractures. The Ferris wheel loomed in the distance, a skeletal giant frozen in time, its metal frame barely visible in the night. Velma followed, adjusting her glasses as she flipped through a collection of old documents she had obtained from city records. Her brows furrowed as she compared the blueprints to what lay before them. Daphne trailed her fingers along the cold metal of the gate, feeling the texture of rust against her skin. Something wasn't right. The chain wrapped around the entrance was too new, its links barely touched by corrosion. Someone had been here. Shaggy lingered near the van, shifting uneasily. Scooby, pressed against his leg, let out a soft whimper. Their instincts screamed at them to turn back. A single light flickered deep within the park. It wasn't much, just enough to send a weak glow over the broken pavement. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. The silence grew heavier. Fred tightened his grip on the chain and yanked. The rusted metal groaned but gave way beneath the force. The gate swung open with a drawn-out creak, the sound swallowed by the night. Scooby gulped audibly. One by one, they stepped inside. The air changed immediately. It was thick-heavy, like the park itself was watching. Every step forward felt unnatural, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on them. The wind barely moved. Velma suddenly stopped, her flashlight aimed downward. Footprints. Fred followed her gaze. The dirt was disturbed, imprints leading deeper into the park. Daphne's voice was hushed. Someone's been here recently. Before anyone could process what that meant, a metallic creak broke the silence. Slow, deliberate. They turned. The Ferris wheel was moving. The silence inside Wonder Funland was suffocating. The air felt thick, as if it carried the weight of everything that had been left behind. The ground was uneven beneath their feet, cracked pavement giving way to creeping weeds that had claimed what time had abandoned. Overhead, the Ferris wheel loomed, a massive skeleton of rusted steel, its empty cars swaying ever so slightly. There was no wind, no power, and yet it moved. Fred took a cautious step forward, his flashlight casting sharp beams across the desolate midway. Each footstep seemed too loud, swallowed quickly by the stillness around them. The others followed hesitantly, their nerves frayed by the unnatural quiet. Velma knelt, adjusting her glasses as she studied the dirt. She ran her fingers over a set of footprints, the indentations crisp, fresh. Someone had been here recently. She looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. We're not the first ones here. Daphne reached for the gate's heavy chain, running her fingers over the polished metal. It was too new, too intact. This was replaced, she murmured. Not long ago. A sound split the silence, a deep, rhythmic pounding. Thump. It echoed through the air, vibrating beneath their feet. Thump. Shaggy swallowed, his voice shaking. Like we should really think about leaving. Scooby let out a low whimper, pressing against his side. The sound was coming from ahead near the carousel. A flicker of light sparked in the distance, then another. The bulbs lining the carousel sputtered to life, their glow weak and sickly. A broken melody crackled through unseen speakers, the tune distorted, stretched unnaturally. The ride trembled, then lurched into motion. The painted horses, their once bright eyes dulled with age, rose and fell in jerky, uneven movements. Fred stepped closer, his muscles tense, his beam swept between the carved figures, shadows twisting between them. Then movement, a shape slipping through the ride, ducking between the horses. Without hesitation, Fred jumped onto the platform. The wood creaked beneath him. The others hesitated before following. The carousel spun faster. The music grew more erratic, its notes clashing together in a twisted, warped song. Velma moved carefully, her gaze locked on the shifting darkness ahead. Daphne's fists clenched at her sides, her breath coming in steady, measured beats. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the carousel screeched to a halt. The music cut off mid-note. The bulbs flickered once, then died, plunging them into darkness. Something moved above them. Fred barely had time to react before his flashlight beam caught the figure clinging to the central column, a pale mask, hollow eyes staring back at him. Then, it dropped. Fred lunged, but the figure was faster. It rolled as it landed, slipping between the carved horses before disappearing into the night. Velma's breath was quick, her mind racing. That wasn't a ghost. Daphne's voice was tight. Then what was it? Fred turned, scanning the shadows. We're going to find out. The park wasn't abandoned. Someone or something was watching them. The wind howled through the skeletal remains of the amusement park, slipping through rusted metal and shattered glass, creating whispers that seemed almost alive. The massive circus tent loomed before them, its tattered fabric rippling as if breathing. Inside, the silence was suffocating. Dust floated in the dim glow of their flashlights, coating every surface with the weight of time. The stale air carried the scent of rotting wood and something else, something metallic, sharp, and unnatural. At the center of the abandoned ring, a mask lay on the ground. Its porcelain surface was cracked, its painted grin frozen in time. Fred crouched down, picking it up carefully. The back was smooth, save for something deeply etched into the surface, 1978. Velma's voice was tight. That's the year the park shut down. A soft electronic beep echoed through the tent. Everyone turned sharply. Fred's flashlight flickered over the dirt floor. His boot tapped something beneath the dust, sending a hollow vibration through the space. He knelt, brushing away debris. A metal handle gleamed beneath the grime. A trapdoor. A hidden entrance, Fred muttered, gripping the handle and pulling. The wood groaned, the hinges resisting before finally giving way. The hatch snapped open, revealing a dark staircase spiraling downward. A rush of cold, stale air spilled from below, heavy with the scent of damp stone and rusted metal. Scooby let out a whimper. Shaggy took a step back, shaking his head. Like, guys, this is a really bad idea. Velma adjusted her glasses. And that's exactly why we need to check it out. Fred led the way, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The others hesitated, then followed, their footsteps echoing down the narrow steps. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, not a natural chill, but something unnatural, as if the very walls of the tunnel were alive with secrets. At the bottom, a steel door stood in their path. A small keypad blinked softly beside it. Velma studied the rusted metal, her fingers hovering over the buttons. She flipped through her notes, stopping at a handwritten entry copied from old city archives. 1 to 9, -7, -8, she whispered, punching in the code. A mechanical click echoed through the corridor. The door slid open. Beyond it, a vast underground chamber stretched ahead, lined with dust-covered monitors, wires snaking along the ceiling, machines still humming with power. Velma wiped a screen with her sleeve. The carousel flickered to life. The Ferris wheel turned. The circus tent they had just left appeared on another monitor empty. Except for one thing. A shadow moved. Someone was still there. Before they could react, a low mechanical hum rumbled beneath their feet. The screens flickered. A distorted voice crackled through unseen speakers. You shouldn't have come here. A loud clang from above. They turned sharply. Shaggy's face drained of color. That sounded like a lock. Fred rushed back to the staircase. The metal door had sealed shut. Daphne pounded on it. "We're trapped!" The voice returned, softer this time, almost amused. 40 years. 40 years, and no one asked what really happened. But you couldn't leave it alone. Velma's fingers flew over the control panel. "Fred, I think I can override it." The screens changed. New footage appeared. A hidden underground lab. Machines humming. Tanks filled with something. Daphne's breath hitched. "What is this place?" Fred clenched his fists. "This is more than a park." The voice crackled once more. "If you try to leave, you won't make it." The monitors shut off. A slow, mechanical whirring began somewhere deep below them. And then they realized they weren't alone. The underground corridor stretched before them, the walls lined with pipes that pulsed with an eerie blue glow. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of rust and something else, something synthetic, unnatural. Every step echoed down the narrow passageway, swallowed quickly by the vast darkness that lay ahead. The deeper they moved, the colder the air became. But it wasn't just the temperature. It was an unnatural chill, as if something unseen was pressing against them, whispering from the shadows. Fred kept his flashlight steady, scanning the walls for any indication of where they were heading. His pulse pounded against his ribs, but his grip remained firm. Velma walked beside him, flipping through her notebook, her fingers running over hastily scribbled notes. Daphne and Shaggy followed close behind, their eyes darting toward every shifting shadow. Scooby whimpered, his ears flattened against his head. At the end of the corridor, a massive reinforced door loomed. It was different from the rusted relics they had seen above ground. This door was industrial, sterile, the kind used in places meant to keep people out or keep something in. A small scanner blinked beside it, a single green light standing out against the metallic surface. Velma adjusted her glasses, kneeling beside the panel. She pried the cover open with a small tool from her bag, exposing a tangle of wires. "This system is still active," she murmured. "Someone has been maintaining it." Fred exhaled, gripping his flashlight tighter. "Can you get us in?" Velma's fingers worked quickly, reconnecting wires, rerouting circuits. A soft beep sounded, and the green light turned red. The locks clicked open. Fred took a step forward, pushing the heavy door with both hands. It groaned as it slid open, revealing the chamber beyond. Inside, rows of cylindrical tanks lined the walls, their thick glass surfaces fogged over with condensation. Condensation dripped in slow, deliberate trails down the reinforced glass. Cables snaked between the tanks, disappearing into the grated floor. The room hummed, the machinery still alive, still running. Daphne took a hesitant step forward, her arms wrapped around herself. "This isn't just an underground storage facility," she whispered. Velma ran a hand over one of the tanks, her breath visible in the cold. "No, it's a laboratory." Fred's light flickered over the labels at the base of each tank. Some were worn, unreadable. Others still bore names. But the ones that disturbed him the most were blank. The only markings were strings of numbers, test codes. He stepped closer, his breath shallow. Something was inside. Before he could react, a monitor on the far side of the room flickered to life. Static crackled across the screen before resolving into a grainy image. A man in a black coat stood surrounded by glowing monitors, his expression unreadable. His face was familiar, but it took Fred a moment to recognize him. Henry Wallace, the man who had vanished when the park shut down. Wallace's voice came through the speakers, smooth, calculated. "You're persistent. I'll give you that." Fred squared his shoulders. "You've been here this whole time." Wallace tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. This park was never about rides and games. It was about progress. Velma's voice was tight. "Progress? You were experimenting on people." Wallace exhaled as if disappointed. "People never understand what they fear." A deep hum rumbled beneath their feet. The floor vibrated. Machines came to life. Lights flickered above them. The tanks began to drain. Fred turned sharply. Inside the glass enclosures, shadows twitched, limbs jerked. Eyes snapped open cold, mechanical, inhuman. The locks on the tanks disengaged with a hiss. Wallace's voice echoed one last time. "You shouldn't have come here." The tanks opened, and the things inside began to move. The hiss of the draining tanks filled the chamber, a sickly gurgling sound as the thick, yellowish fluid seeped through the grates in the floor. The figures inside the glass enclosures twitched, their limbs jerking in unnatural spasms, as if waking from a long, restless sleep. The air smelled of metal, decay, and something worse, something sterile and wrong. The lights overhead flickered, casting jagged shadows that danced across the walls. Fred took a cautious step back, his pulse hammering in his ears. His grip on the flashlight tightened, the beam trembling slightly as he directed it toward the nearest tank. The glass was fogged over with condensation, streaked where something had pressed against the inside. Then, slowly, fingers slid down the other side of the glass, leaving a trail of smeared fluid. Velma was already at the console, her fingers flying over the outdated keyboard. The monitors around her flickered between distorted static and lines of scrambled code. "I don't think I can shut it down," she said, her voice tight. "This system isn't designed to be overridden from here." Daphne took a step closer, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to ward off the chill that crept through the room. "Then where?" A voice crackled through the overhead speakers, distorted but unmistakable. Henry Wallace's face reappeared on the main monitor, watching them with calm detachment. "You still think you're in control?" he mused. "You walked into my playground, and now you expect to walk out?" Fred's jaw clenched. "We're leaving," he said, his voice firm. "And we're shutting this place down." Wallace chuckled softly. "You really think I didn't prepare for that?" The floor beneath them vibrated as machinery deep within the facility roared to life. The tanks let out a final hiss as their locks disengaged completely. One by one, the glass doors slid open. The first figure stepped forward. Its movements were stiff, mechanical, as if it wasn't entirely sure how to use its body. Wires trailed from its back like marionette strings. The pale, lifeless skin stretched over an elongated frame, and when it lifted its head, its eyes gleamed red, soulless. Daphne let out a sharp breath. "Oh my God." More of them stepped forward, their heads snapping unnaturally toward the group, their metallic joints creaking as they adjusted. Their mouths opened as if they were about to speak, but only static came out, a garbled, distorted attempt at human sound. Fred grabbed Daphne's wrist and pulled her back. "Run!" They turned, bolting for the nearest door. Shaggy and Scooby were already ahead of them, feet pounding against the steel floor, their breaths ragged with fear. Velma barely managed to grab her notebook before following, her heart hammering against her ribs. The creatures moved faster than expected, their metal-infused limbs giving them unnatural agility. One lunged forward, its clawed fingers swiping inches from Velma's back. She stumbled, but kept running. Fred reached the exit panel first and slammed his palm against it. The door didn't budge. The red warning light above the panel blinked ominously. "Locked," he shouted. Velma skidded to a stop beside him, fumbling with her tools. "Give me a second." The creatures were closing in. Their movements were jerky, but calculated. One let out a piercing shriek, making Scooby yelp in terror. Shaggy's voice cracked. "We are so doomed." Velma yanked a cable free and forced a connection. Sparks flew as she twisted the exposed wiring, bypassing the lock. The panel flickered. Access granted. The door slid open just as the closest creature lunged. Fred shoved Daphne through first, followed by Shaggy and Scooby. Velma dove through next, and Fred barely made it through before slamming his fist against the emergency override. The door slammed shut behind them, cutting off the mechanical shrieks. They ran down the next corridor, their breaths coming in quick gasps. The hall stretched ahead, a long metallic tunnel leading toward a final chamber, where the glowing words "Main Control Room" were etched onto the steel doors. Daphne pressed a hand against her chest, catching her breath. That was too close. Velma wiped her glasses. "We need to shut this place down for good." Fred nodded. "Then let's end this." Without hesitation, he pushed open the doors, and they stepped inside. The door creaks open. No one moves. No one speaks. Beyond the doorway, the hallway is impossibly dark, stretching into an abyss that wasn't there before. The air shifts heavier, colder. A presence lingers, unseen but undeniably there. "Don't," Velma whispers. But Fred steps forward. The leader, the brave one. He grips the edge of the doorframe and looks out into the darkness. "Hello?" His voice is steady. "Who's there?" Silence. Then, a whisper. "You were never supposed to remember." A gust of cold air surges through the room. The gang stumbles back as the hotel seems to groan around them, wood creaking, walls shifting. The floor feels unstable, as if the very structure is rejecting them. "What does that mean?" Daphne shouts over the rising wind. "It means we learned something we weren't supposed to," Velma says. "And whatever erased our memories last time is trying to do it again." The lights flicker violently, plunging them into flashes of darkness. The knocking returns, pounding now from every door in the hallway, a deep, rhythmic force, as if something is waking up. "We have to get out of here," Shaggy yells, gripping Scooby's collar. "The road was gone," Daphne shouts. "Not if we leave the same way we did before." Velma's mind races. The first time whatever happened, her memories were wiped. If we figure out how, maybe we can break free. Fred's eyes snap to the cassette tape still in Velma's hands. "The tape!" he exclaims. "It's the only thing that survived. It's proof we were here before." "So what do we do with it?" Daphne asks. Velma's mind races. If it's a memory, maybe it needs to be erased. "You're saying we have to destroy it?" Shaggy stares at her. "But it's the only thing that tells us the truth. And it's the only thing keeping us here." Velma grips the tape. "If we want to leave, we have to let it go." The knocking stops. The room falls into perfect, unnatural silence. Then, a voice, cold, ancient. "Choose." Velma looks at her friends Fred, Daphne, Shaggy, Scooby. They're afraid, but they trust her. She throws the cassette to the ground. With a sharp stomp, she crushes it beneath her heel. The plastic cracks. The tape snaps. A sound erupts, a piercing, inhuman wail. The walls tremble. The air distorts. For a brief, agonizing moment, everything fades, colors, sounds, the very feel of existence, until they're back in the van. The mystery machine sits at the edge of an empty highway. The town is gone. No ruins, no road signs, no trace of Ravenswood ever existing. "What just happened?" Daphne asks, voice hoarse. Velma looks down. Her hands are empty. The cassette is gone. She hesitates. "I don't know." Fred grips the wheel, staring ahead. "Do you guys remember why we stopped?" Shaggy blinks. No." Daphne shakes her head. "Were we looking for something?" "I don't think so." Velma frowns, trying to focus. But the harder she thinks, the more the details slip away. "Asterisk?" "Let's just get out of here," Fred says, starting the engine. Asterisk. As the mystery machine pulls away, Scooby turns his head, looking out the back window. For a second, just a second, he sees it. The hotel, the town, still standing in the distance, watching them leave. He lets out a soft whimper but says nothing. Because this time, he's the only one who remembers. Some mysteries were never meant to be solved.